So let's see. The Clipper City Rail Trail was envisioned, about a quarter century ago, and I was hired to start working on it in 2001, beginning in 2001, and it rapidly became pretty clear that it was going to be a multi-phase project, not just something we could do all at once, because of all the complexities and all the costs involved. And I don't think any of us knew at the time that was going to take 9 or 10 phases to get there, right? As opposed to 1 or 2 or 3. But I've been working on it continuously, for the past 24 years or whatever. And it is really exciting to see it coming to a conclusion in terms of a continuous full loop going around the core of Newburyport's downtown. So the rail trail is used and enjoyed by just thousands of people. It's really one of the most popular and I think most loved public spaces we have now in this community, and it's gotten recognition far and wide for the quality of the trail, all the amenities along it. It's really something. So, there were 1,001 obstacles to overcome to try to build this facility, ranging from having to stitch back together the property rights to be able to build this thing. It follows the route of 2 old railroad corridors, but a lot of that railroad had been pieces of it had been broken off and been sold to other people, and we had to do a pretty complex series of land transaction with multiple entities to try to put this corridor back together legally. And the cost of building the whole trail is many millions of dollars, and Newburyport's a relatively small community, and it can be difficult to support that level of expenditure on facilities. We got a lot of assistance from federal and state funding, which is really critical to making this happen. But I would say all along, throughout, multiple mayors, multiple city councils, the general public, there has, largely been a real consensus on moving this project forward and completing it, even though it's taken a couple of decades to do it. Sometimes we ran into obstacles that were unseen, or unanticipated, such as finding soil contamination on the railroad corridor out behind the wastewater treatment plant on the shoreline there, which held us back several years as we tried to figure out how to best clean that up and then rebuild that whole section. In terms of the new central waterfront section that was just completed this year, Central Waterfront is an area that Newburyport has been fighting amongst itself, for like 50 years. What's going to be built there? What are we going to do there? And, in recent years, as the focus has shifted towards expanding parkland there, the idea of essentially making the rail trail be the backbone of this expanded park was a key part of figuring out how to do that. And prior to that, this recently completed project expanding the waterfront park and building that pathway, we had brought the rail trail basically up to both sides, but then people had to pick their way through parking lots and so forth to get to the other side. So that's very exciting, seeing that come to fruition. We've had a lot of enthusiasm expressed by people as they've used that new section. And then also the sections to the south along Parker Street and at the traffic circle crossing Route 1. Those are currently being finished this year by both a private developer as well as by the state of Massachusetts, Mass DOT. And so after all these years, we're witnessing the completion of this continuous 3 or 4 mile route circling around Newburyport, and it's an exciting thing. What's next in terms of like rail trails and that and those sorts of because I mean I work on many different projects, from public buildings to working on the new fire station now, for instance, to other things of the waterfront like the new bulkhead, to land conservation, other parks. So I have lots of projects going on in terms of connecting trails and so forth. There's back 15 years ago, we connected the rail trail with Cashman Park, with a boardwalk. There are long-standing kind of general visions of trying to push out connections farther and farther, and we've worked with the surrounding communities, Newbury and Amesbury and Salisbury, to try to create more and more of an interconnected network, and advocates in all these communities have actually worked together, supporting each other on all the various projects that go into that. So that work has created a remarkable network over the past couple of decades, but there's still more work to be done there. There's potentially more work to try to extend the pathways along the Merrimack River. And there's something called, envisioned as the Merrimack River Trail, to try to stitch together the pieces of trail that run along the shoreline. There's lots of challenges there, right? Whether it's land ownership or marshes and having to build expensive boardwalks and so forth. And I was actually thinking about this recently, that I've spent a good chunk of my working life building this facility, from the idea and conception of it up through the reality of having it in place. And there may need to be some future generations that can figure out how to keep extending it. I was just taking a trip in France, in England, and I was walking along a trail in Brittany, France, that we walked 65 miles of it over the course of some days, 5 days. But that trail goes for over 1,000 miles. It's a different culture in England and France and the rest of Europe around bike trails and pedestrian trails. Different culture, different history, different tradition. But it's also an inspiration as we kind of slowly try to pursue that over here in our own communities. So I've spent many years just trying to build a few miles of trail, and I hope that those coming after me will continue to expand that network. I think increasingly it is a goal. The settlement patterns that we've all inherited, particularly in the 20th century, do work against what we're talking about here, and as well as our specific culture of private property rights and so forth. So, we live in regions that have been defined by the car, by roads in the car, and the having to go back and retrofit all of that pattern of settlement is an enormous job. It's not that it's impossible, but we have People live in a very spread out manner, and it is difficult to and very costly to install these. I think that, there's been a growing movement over the past couple of decades, with many communities and many people interested in realizing that in addition to vehicles, motor vehicles, that we want to be able to create all these other modes of transportation and make it easy and make it inviting for both walking, bicycling, and so forth. But it is very expensive and very complicated. So we see these sort of slow movements building throughout Massachusetts and other states. And I think that's going to continue, but it's going to be a long time before we have, multiple 1,000-mile pathways like in Europe. Yeah, I'm going back 25 years. There was a fair bit of enthusiasm. Going back 50 years, these railroads are getting abandoned. And people were starting to think, the residents of the community were starting to think at the time, you can find old newspaper articles and so forth. We should reuse these corridors. We should do something and turn them into trails. But it's a daunting prospect, and that idea sat there for quite a long time. But about 25 years ago or so, the idea did again sort of bubble back up, particularly as federal funding was beginning to be made available specifically for these kinds of projects, and that would spark people's imaginations. Early on in my tenure here, working for the city, I was working with citizens and local advocates, and eventually helped to create a nonprofit advocacy organization called the Coastal Trails Coalition. There had been individual, informal citizens groups in these different towns trying to push these ideas forward. There had been local volunteers who were spending lots of time and energy on their own trying to, clear portions of pathways and make them more inviting. And we did work to create this citizen-based nonprofit incorporated group, the Coastal Trails Coalition, which is going strong and has served as a very strong voice for the public to help push their elected leadership and push the local governments to pursue these projects. So there's that aspect of the public being involved. For a project like the rail trail, as you might imagine, there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of public meetings, multiple different forums. Some of it is regulatory, others are just informational, but scores of meetings. And we've had lots of people participating and attending those meetings over time. And, on occasion, there's issues to sort through and figure out. But for the most part, the tone and tenor of all these meetings has been supportive of eventually trying to make this happen. Without that level of support from the public, there's no way this could have been done, because over and over again we had to go back and request pieces of funding, so we could keep pushing forward the design and permitting and so forth of this, even though much of the funding came from federal and state sources. Newburyport had to spend a fair amount of money to do all the design, to do the right-of-way acquisition, to do the permitting. So, and then all the sort of little individual aspects of the trail help get shaped by interaction with the local residents, with the abutting residents, with the neighborhood. Multiple neighborhood meetings during the planning phases will determine, do we have stairs here or not? What's the exact alignment of the trail here? What do we try to preserve of the old corridor? And what are we making a clean slate of so that we can make something new? So there's multiple entry points essentially for the public to be involved in a project like this. And at the same time, it's been really, I think, key to have not just a volunteer committee, which is what you sometimes have in other towns, but dedicated professional staff who've been empowered and assigned to move this project forward. I mean, we're witnessing essentially the completion of the original vision, which is this approximately, I'm not exactly sure actually how actually long it is, but it's about 3 or 4 miles, 3.5 miles, something like that. So we're witnessing the completion of that continuous corridor, which has been really exactly what we've been hoping for all this time. So I can't say that there's pieces of it where there's been missed opportunities or things we haven't been able to do. I would like to be able to kind of continue expanding connections to it, whether it's along the river or down south towards other communities, and have more regional connections. There's significant challenges with that, and so it'll depend on people's interest and how much time and energy and money people want to invest. One thing that this is a speculation, but the rail trail is clearly valued. The existing rail trail that we created is clearly valued by a lot of people. It's possible that people feel like we have enough now. We've got this great rail trail. Why do we need to keep extending it? I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but it will be interesting going forward to see, now that we've completed this long-term plan, what appetite there is for continuing to connect with other communities and expand, given the multiple physical obstacles and financial obstacles and ownership obstacles that inevitably come to bear on projects like this. Yeah, I love those elements of the rail trail, and I've always thought of going on the rail trail, whether you're walking or biking or whatever, as a layered experience. And for people who want to stop and read those historical panels, it's almost like a walk through time, right? You're enjoying the trail here in 2024, but you can look back and see what was happening on that spot 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I spent a fair bit of time researching and writing and assembling those historical panels, and I think those have been pretty well received. Not everyone is interested in local history or stopping and reading those panels, but and that's fine. But certainly there's a number of people who are very interested in seeing what came before. It gives a little window into our, who was living here and how the land was used in past generations. And then, I think you're referencing a number of sculptures and artwork, public art, along the corridor. For me, that was inspired again by going to places like Paris and other places that have public art integrated into their public spaces, and having it along a corridor like this is a great opportunity to add a whole nother level of experience for people. So that was a great part for me of working on this project, to identify artists, commission some works, buy existing sculptures from others, and put together these sort of very different pieces, which really make the corridor, I think, particularly unique public space. And people pretty far and wide have expressed real satisfaction that, in addition to the basic trail, the trail is the basic thing, that we have these other sort of layers and levels of experience along the way. Yeah, the rail trail, I've worked on a lot of projects in my time here working for Newburyport and working for the public. I would say that the rail trail is among the best things I've ever worked on, and that I feel the most pride in. Being able to go out myself on the trail and see so many people enjoying that space and enjoying seeing each other out in that corridor, and being able to move their bodies and move along this shared space, it's very, very fulfilling. So it's been, I'm glad there's been so much support over the years, and I'm glad I've been the one who could help push this forward.